I didn't think a charging cable could change a man's life, I really didn't. But that night in a downtown parking garage, I watched one do exactly that, and the wildest part is it wasn't even my life that got flipped upside down. It was his. You ever have a moment where something small happens and your gut tells you, this is about to turn into a story you'll be telling for years? Yeah, that was one of those nights. I'd just finished a 12-hour shift staring at lines of code, brain-fried shoulders, tight eyes dry like sandpaper, and all I wanted was to plug my car in, grab a coffee upstairs, answer a few emails, and head home like a normal human being. I pulled into the garage around 9:40, cold air sneaking in every time a car passed the entrance, concrete pillars throwing long shadows, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, that faint smell of rainwater and rubber hanging in the air. You know, the kind of place that feels half asleep even when it's not. And I found the last open charging station like it was the final seat on a flight home for Christmas. I parked, tapped my app, heard that little click that says, "You're connected," saw the charging light start pulsing, and I remember thinking, nice, smooth night. Nothing dramatic, just routine. I went upstairs to the cafe, ordered a coffee, opened my laptop, started answering emails, and maybe 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a notification saying, "Charging interrupted," which honestly didn't stress me out at first because those apps glitch sometimes. Signal drops, servers, hiccup, technology being technology. So I packed up, headed back down the spiral ramp, footsteps echoing louder the deeper I went, and as I turned the corner toward my spot, I saw something that didn't make sense. Like your brain takes a second to process what your eyes are telling it. My charging cable wasn't connected to my car anymore. It was stretched across the concrete floor and plugged into a massive gray truck parked sideways like it owned the place, and leaning against that truck was a guy in a camo cap chewing gum. Slow arms, folded posture, relaxed like he was waiting for valet service instead of standing next to something he had no business touching. I stopped a few feet away and said, calm but confused, "Hold up. Did you just unplug my car to charge yours?" And he didn't even look embarrassed, didn't flinch, didn't pretend it was an accident. He just shrugged and said, "Yeah, mine needs it more." Like that was a perfectly normal thing to say to a stranger whose electricity he was literally using. I pointed at my car and told him I paid for that station, and that's when he looked me up and down, slow, deliberate eyes scanning me like he was reading a label, and he smirked and said, "Relax. People like you probably didn't pay for that car anyway." Now I'm going to pause right there, because if you've ever had someone hit you with that phrase, "people like you," you know it lands heavier than it sounds. It's one of those lines that carries a whole history behind it, whether the person saying it admits it or not. And in that second, the temperature in that garage dropped 10 degrees, even though nothing around us changed. My chest tightened, jaw locked, but I remembered what my dad used to say. Growing up, stay calm, calm wins. So I kept my hands open, palms up, voice steady, and I asked, "Who do you think you're talking to?" And he chuckled, like I just told him a joke, and said, "Someone who's not waiting around all night, that's who." See, he thought this was about convenience, about whose battery filled first. But I could tell it wasn't really about electricity. It was about entitlement, about space, about the quiet assumption that his needs ranked higher than mine before he even knew my name. I stepped a little closer and said, "Unplug it now," and he crossed his arms tighter and said, "Not happening." And the silence after that felt thick, like the whole garage was holding its breath, waiting to see who blinked first. I noticed the security camera mounted on the pillar to my left, small black dome just sitting there watching. And that's when I decided this wasn't going to be a shouting match. So instead of raising my voice, I pulled out my phone and hit record. And I swear you could see the shift in his posture the second he realized he was on camera. Shoulders, stiffening chin, lifting confidence, turning into performance. A red sedan rolled into the lane behind us, and the driver rolled down her window asking if everything was okay. And before he could spin a story, I said, "This man unplugged my car and called me a thief." And she looked from me to him to the cable on the ground, and her eyebrows shot up like she'd just walked into a live episode of something she didn't expect to see tonight. He waved her off, telling her to mind her business, which honestly was his second mistake because witnesses change everything, and then he stepped closer to me, voice low, telling me I should just leave, and I said, "You should just unplug." And we stood there like statues, two strangers locked in a stare down under flickering lights while the charger hummed between us like background music. Then headlights flashed across the wall, and a security cart rolled in amber lights bouncing off the concrete, and a woman in a reflective vest stepped out carrying a tablet with that calm, no-nonsense walk of someone who's dealt with every flavor of nonsense before. She asked what was going on, held up a hand to stop him from talking, turned to me and asked if that was my vehicle. I said, "Yes, ma'am." She checked the charger display, tapped her tablet, nodded once, then faced him and asked if the truck was his. He said, "Yeah." She asked if he started the session. He hesitated and said, "Well, no, but I was about to," and she didn't even blink, just said, "Unplug it now." The smirk vanished, replaced by that tight look people get when reality taps them on the shoulder, and he yanked the cable out, dropped it, muttered something under his breath, and she wrote down his license plate while he climbed into his truck and peeled out like the concrete had insulted his ancestors. I plugged my car back in, hands steady again, but I didn't stop recording until his taillights disappeared, because something in my gut told me this wasn't over yet. When I got home, I watched the video, and watching it back was different than living it because you could hear his tone clearly, see his expression, feel the arrogance through the screen, and I thought to myself, people should see this. Not for revenge, not for drama, just because moments like that usually vanish into thin air and nobody believes they happened. So yeah, I posted it. Within hours, it started spreading shares, comments, messages from strangers saying, "Man, I've seen stuff like this before." And within a day, someone recognized him. Turns out he wasn't just some random guy with a truck. He was a regional sales director at a construction supply company, six-figure salary company, perks the whole deal. His employer released a statement saying they were reviewing the matter, which you and I both know is corporate language for "we're panicking quietly." And while they reviewed, people started digging old coworkers, former clients, folks who'd apparently been waiting for a reason to speak up, and stories started surfacing about meetings where he talked over women, deals where he refused to deal with minority reps, emails with jokes that weren't really jokes unless you thought prejudice was funny. 3 days after the video went up, the company released another statement, shorter this time, saying they'd terminated his employment effective immediately, and that's when the whole thing really sank in for me, because I never set out to ruin anybody's career. I just wanted my charger back, you know what I mean? But actions echo, and sometimes they echo loud. Over the next month, I heard bits and pieces through messages and articles he applied for unemployment and got denied for misconduct. His wife filed for separation. Someone spotted him working at a warehouse, scanning packages under fluorescent lights, which felt almost poetic in a strange way, because the same kind of system tracking his productivity was the kind he probably used to manage others. Meanwhile, my life didn't change much. I still went to work, fixed bugs, paid bills, stood in grocery lines, regular stuff, and I decided to use part of the settlement money from the civil case. Yeah, there was a case, and yeah, it settled to fund a small scholarship for students studying urban design, because I kept thinking maybe if public spaces were designed with fairness in mind, fewer people would feel entitled to take what isn't theirs. People ask me sometimes, do you hate him? And honestly, no, I don't, because hate would mean carrying him around in my head rent-free, and I've got better things to store up there. I think he showed exactly who he was, and the world responded accordingly. The camera didn't ruin his life. The camera just introduced him to consequences. And sometimes I still think about that moment, about how fast it all escalated, about how a simple decision like pressing record instead of raising my voice changed the entire outcome. And I wonder if I'd been dressed differently that night. Suit and tie instead of hoodie and sneakers. Would he have touched that cable at all, or would he have waited like everybody else? That question sticks with me because there's no clean answer. And maybe that's why the video kept spreading, because people didn't just see a confrontation, they saw a reflection. Some saw justice. Some saw overreaction, some saw karma, some saw a guy having his worst day blasted across the internet forever. So now I'm curious what you think, honestly, if you'd been standing there in that garage watching the whole thing unfold in real time. Would you have stepped in, stayed quiet, backed him up, backed me up? And do you think losing his job was fair consequences, or too much for one moment of arrogance? Tell me what you'd have done and why, and if you've ever witnessed something like this in your own life, I want to hear that too, because